Hello and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful. I'm back in the studio today, continuing work on the gel print art series. If you've been following along, this is, I think, video number 14. So thank you for watching. And if you're brand new to my channel, welcome. I hope that you enjoy this video. If you do, please give me a thumbs up. Click on subscribe if you haven't already. And then there's a little bell that you can click on to receive a notification when I do post a new video. So today's video is, again, I think number 14, and it's kind of taking off from the last video, number 13, which was making buttons. So I'm going to show you the finished buttons. I didn't have them all finished at the end of the last video because I was making so many. And so I want to show you the finished ones and then also what I've come up with similarly to make in addition to buttons. So that's what today's video is going to be about. I am going to kind of run through where we've come so far for those of you who haven't been watching and kind of go through how the artwork came about. So in the first video in the series, it was about just showing some projects that I had already created and then decided to do the series. And then the second and third video, I believe if my memory is correct, were about actually making the gel prints for those people who aren't familiar with gel printing. And so I covered that in a couple of videos. And then I like to transform my papers from that stage. And I'm going to show you just kind of quickly what we went through. And I do all of these in demonstrations in this series. So that's why it's kind of important to start from the beginning if you want to understand some of the things I'm making reference to. So we did that, got the papers ready, and I'll kind of show you what that is and then some of the projects that we've already covered so that you'll want to go back and maybe watch those. So these are just some random ones that I hadn't torn up yet, so I pulled those. I like to gel print on things just like plain cheap copy paper, and that's what these two are. And then I also like using rice paper, and I've used a couple of different weights of rice paper to print on. But these, you can tell the sheets are different sizes, 8.5 by 11 and 9 by 12. Another piece of a little heavier copy paper. So you can print on anything, but those are the kind of the copy paper, the thinner papers are the ones that I like to work with. So once I've printed these, I end up with just a pile of papers, and just for storage reasons and even just visually for me, I don't like seeing all these white edges, so I like to tear them off, and then I'm left with just a nice, clean piece of printed paper that I can grab from for collage or whatever. So I started doing that a long time ago, and I've had other videos previous to this series that I've done this kind of idea in what to do with those little scrappy pieces. So I take those, all my little torn pieces, and you can see they're all kind of random lengths if I move them aside here. And so I have videos of how two different ways that I kind of turn these into collaging them onto other papers to create what I call my stripy papers. So you'll hear me refer to my stripy papers all the time, and that's what these are. So you can see where I had white space, those white, and they're kind of overlapped because they were just all glued together, one on top of the other. And then I doodle on them, and I do lots of mark making and make them a much busier pattern. And then from there, we use these to create some fun art projects. This is another one, and I wanted to show you too, if you haven't been watching, just to compare the scale of the pattern. So this one is wider painted pieces. When I would tear those off, once I realized how much I liked creating this artwork, when I would tear off from my larger piece, I would actually change up the amount of painted paper that I would tear off so that my sizes of my strips would be varied. So that was all conscious after, the first time I did this, I was leaving just the skinniest little part so that my larger finished piece would be large. But I'm using them for collage, and so they're mostly getting torn up anyway. So I thought I preferred to maybe control more the amount that I'm tearing off of my larger sheet. So this one has a little more finer doodling on it in detail, and even some stitching from my sewing machine just to give it some more interest. So when I'm referring to stripy papers, this is what I'm talking about. So from those stripy papers, when I've had all these strips, that I've attached, you end up with all these random pieces on the sides. So I trim those off too, just so that when I'm working with these, they're not all tattered on the edge. So I like that clean edge. So once I've trimmed those off, now I end up with all of these little random pieces. And sometimes they're glued together well and sometimes not. Sometimes they tear, but I save all of these. And then I take one of my pieces of, let me put this aside for a second. I take one of my pieces of maybe a paper that I've, coffee stained, or one of my grungy papers or something like that. I'll take something that I wasn't really happy with and use it as a background, and then I will glue down all of these little strips randomly, and I'll usually do a straight line and then the jaggedy edge, and then try to puzzle in another jaggedy edge just to give my spaces in between this irregular shape. And then maybe I want some straight lines, so I'll put the two straight edges together. So you can see how wonky they are, and I like that. So I'll glue a whole sheet down, and from there I end up with something like this. So this was a grungy piece of paper that I glued all those strips to. And then I don't like seeing all the bits of white, so I actually would paint with some watercolor and just kind of dirty up those white parts, and then outline every little cell in gold, even where they overlap, and the painted part, just to kind of break my page up into little cells that I can doodle in individually. And then of course my in-betweens, I have not done anything here yet, but in my in-betweens I like to fill those in with black pen work and metallics and that kind of thing. So I've covered all this in longer form videos, but I'm just kind of, giving you a teaser. And then from that piece, I would doodle even more and more, and you can see how fine all that is. Now I could take a piece of this, and I may at some point when I get more of these finished, take a block and just frame that. And that's really, an interesting piece of art. But part of the reason that I'm doing all this super fine detailed work is that if I want to make smaller little art items, I still have a lot of interest in those. And so that's where the buttons came in. So we took a hole punch, this is 1 inch, and you can actually, using this as a frame, decide what your button will look like. So you are, you're still doing art. You're kind of, looking at your composition and creating some really fun little art pieces. So we turned ours in the last video into buttons. So some of this one I hadn't even finished doodling on. It's getting close now. There's only a couple cells I see that could have anything added to them. And I just work on these in the evening. But then I've already been, for the projects I'm going to show you, I've already been cutting this up. And so last night I wanted to kind of square up my edges. So I ended up creating these little frames and things, and just all the little tiny bits. And those can be used in things like my cards that I've already made. You've seen those. And so I'll show you quickly some of the projects that we've already done with the stripy papers, the larger scale patterns, because these last two projects are the last two videos, this one and the previous one, are the ones where I've used the smaller scale, more detailed artwork. So the larger ones, we did things like these vessels, and I have a whole bunch of them up here with all of my pens and scissors and all that kind of stuff in. And then we did, what else did we do? We did some panels, some cradles. I did a few of these little art panels. So those were all with the stripy papers as well. And then I made some shadow boxes. Oh, I did these shadow boxes first. I did about, I think, 5 of these shadow boxes where you use a purchased shadow box and your gel prints in stripy papers with some found objects. And that led me to other types of shadow boxes you could make out of found objects. So I used some old Reader's Digest books and created some frames for gel print collage and found objects. And I did this one to show that you can actually, if this is not your style, though really colorful, that you could also, use vintage books and make shadow box, but then I'm still using the gel print stripy papers and found objects. So those are some of the things that we have already done. And then I moved to the buttons, and I want to show you those, and then we'll get to the new thing. So today's video is going to cover a lot of different things. So I would not want to encourage you to fast forward through this one, because even though we're going to be doing some similar things to this, each one has its own little idiosyncrasies that I'm going to have tips and tricks for you to work with this product that we're going to do. And each thing we make, they have a little thing about them. So don't fast forward through, because there's going to be tips kind of throughout the whole thing. Okay, so we did buttons, and I'll show you the round ones first. We did the 1-inch buttons, and just to show that you could do them and show you the difference between the large scale patterns or even not using gel prints. These were, the techniques I'm going to show you could be used for any kind of artwork, not necessarily gel print art, but because that's what we're doing in this series, I'm focusing on that. But I also showed that you can use other papers and things and create some buttons. So these were done with my digital kit of clock faces. These were done with the larger stripy papers. So, you get a larger pattern on your button, and which is totally fine. But then I wanted to show you how the other ones turned out. Now, I don't have them all here. I have some kind of pulled out because I'm not gonna maybe sell them, but I was able in my batch of buttons, and you can see that when you do these papers, they're very colorful. When I'm doing it, it's completely intuitive. I'm just grabbing any color pen, and I might use it multiple places, and then I grab a different color, and I'm not really paying too much attention to an end result. And that's the fun in it for me. It's super relaxing, and art is supposed to be about the journey and the play anyway. So this is kind of really is a way, especially if you're just starting out like me. I'm a new artist. I've been a crafter and a maker forever, but as far as using art materials, that's all been really new to me. It's very relaxing and low pressure. And so I think if you're a beginner and maybe you're not like me, I'm not very good at drawing a specific thing, and that it really gets your hands kind of exercised as far as feeling comfortable with pen work and that kind of thing, and drawing. And it's not complicated, but it looks complicated. So it's just a lot of fun. And then taking those bits, because you're cutting them out of a thing, is you can, because it's one paper. So from one paper to another paper, and you can really see it in maybe the larger stripy papers. Even though I did both of these, they look similar, but they might look different because of the color palette and that kind of thing. But when you're making, say, a set of buttons, if I'm cutting them all out of the same piece of paper, those are going to be cohesive because I was probably using the pen multiple places on the same paper. So there's probably something in each one that ties them together. So the fun thing, and I didn't plan this when I'm punching them out, I just kind of went and punched things I liked. I was able to actually pair them up, even though they're different, and make them look cohesive together, because maybe there is, like in this case, it's the same section of the stripe, the black and my background paper stripe, or there might be a color that's the same in both. This one had a little black and gold stripe, and this one had black with gold dots. So, and then this stripe is similar. So I was able to, pull two buttons together that even though they're different, they look good together. So I thought that was a real interesting, fun, happy accident. And then here are the larger round ones. And a couple of them I made into buttons with the shank on the back. And then these two, I put a pin back on them. So, you can pin them onto something. So that was just another fun idea with our button idea. And then I did also some heart shape ones. And same thing, I was able to kind of pull them together, some better than others maybe, in a pair. But those are just so cute to me. And they can be used. When I started making buttons, I was making them because I knit and I make neck warmers, and they're button neck warmers. And so I like to have my own unique buttons on them. And I just thought these would be a lot of fun. And then these, I put a shank on, but you could do the same thing and put a pin back on these, some larger hearts. So those were the buttons that I did in the last video. And then today I have some other things to show you. So let me get these out of my way. Okay, so the things that I've made since then is I went to Michael's and just to see what they might have in their jewelry section and other things that I might be able to do with the buttons. So I'm going to start with some things that are the same exact way that we did the buttons in the last video. So you'll need to watch that one. I'm not going to go through all of that in this video. But the most obvious thing to me was to take the buttons and make them into magnets. So I kind of have them with some sticky putty on this just to put it here. But these are just little magnets with a little flat magnet on the back. And the tip for this, they're made exactly like the buttons. And you can see I cut these out of the same page so that they really coordinated nicely as a set of 6. So the tip I have about the buttons is in the buttons that we made in the last video, I used 3 layers of my substrate. And my substrate is some recycled packaging material that's just like a really thin, like a chipboard, but it's thin so that you're able to cut, punch through this without too much trouble. But then I wanted my buttons to be substantial, to be thicker and domed. And so I used 3 layers of the substrate plus the artwork. And then when you dome it with the resin, it makes it that much thicker. So if you watched the last video, you know that I used resin to seal these completely so that they can be waterproof and washable. And so that's true for the buttons and really pretty much for everything else that I did. So for these, when you're doing a magnet, you don't want it to be too heavy because when you purchase these adhesive magnets to put on the back, they can only handle so much weight. And so you want them to be able to hold your design, but then you want them to also hold whatever paper or photo or anything that you're using the magnet for. Okay. So the lighter weight you can make these, the better. And we're using resin, so that's also adding weight to them. So I tried to keep these a little thinner. I just used 2 layers, and you can even just use 1 of the substrate and then maybe not do as many layers also of the resin. So for the resin, and if you didn't watch the last video, the resin that I'm using in the past, I have experience, quite a bit of experience using resin to make jewelry. My necklaces, if you've been following me and you can see it on my older Instagram, you might see some jewelry on there. I make some open bezels that don't have a back, and I was using a 2-part epoxy resin for that. And the product that I was using is no longer on the market, and so someone along the way had mentioned, why don't you use UV resin? And I had never tried it. So I am using it now, and there are some benefits to it versus the epoxy, the 2-part that you mix there. And then I've mentioned those in the button video, but I'm using a brand called Picasso, and I do really like that. So this is what I'm using. I have links for all this stuff down in the description. So if you have not tried it, and there are other brands, you can use whatever brand you want. UV resin, you need a UV lamp to cure it, or you can do it in direct sunshine or, filtered sunshine, whatever, sunshine. That just takes a little longer depending on how intense your sun is. So that's what I'm using. I've covered all this again, like I said in the last video. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but that's what I'm using to cure is the UV light. Okay, so for the magnets, I had just purchased a brand that they had at Michael's, and the first ones, they weren't strong enough. So I ordered some online, and the adhesive is from 3M, so they stick nicely, and that's what I used on these. And so these weren't expensive. I ordered them on Amazon, and I have a link for that too. But these were a little bit stronger magnets, and so they're working. I tested them out with a piece of paper, and they worked fine. So magnets are an obvious thing, and then you end up with these cute little art pieces to put on your fridge or wherever. Then the other thing similar to that with the same technique, I should back up. So I had mentioned in the last video, I wondered if using a mold for this would make it any faster or easier. And when I was there, I looked for a mold, and most molds, this one came with the curing light. It was included in the little kit. Most molds for jewelry are meant for jewelry, and they have this little silicone nub in the shape. That's to create the hole for your little charm. And so I'll kind of go over this later on in the video, but I needed something for the buttons that didn't have that little nib. So I guess you could buy one that has that little nib and then cut that off. I hadn't thought about that. That would work. So if you found one that had a whole bunch of 1-inch circles, like a whole sheet of just 1-inch circles with that little nib, I guess you could just clip that off and then you would have it for buttons. But the thing I found that didn't have that little nib was this, and it's a 1-inch circle. It was where for wax seals, if you're making your own little wax seals to keep them a nice shape, that's what this was for. And I tried it. There was no benefit to it to me. And I didn't like that it was straight up and down. It's like if you had a long circle and then you just sliced it. I want mine to be domed. And so this is so deep that if I were to pour this, my buttons would be really thick, and then I still try to dome them. I'd have to do that by hand. So I don't really see a benefit to having a mold. When we did these buttons, we did them all, what I'm gonna call freehand. We didn't use a mold. We just resined right onto our little substrate that we were, our button shape. So all of these things were done without a mold again. So just using a smaller circle punch. And in this case, I just use one layer of substrate. You could use 2, but these are just little hairpins. And I think I have one not in the packaging. So it has a little flat circular back on it. And the only tip I have for this or tricky part using these, they came in a little package of 25 and they came in silver or gold. I got them at Michael's, but you can probably get them online too. I'll try to find links again for all this stuff. Is the circles are great. You can, do them either direction. If you're putting a bobby pin in your hair, it could be used on the sides of your hair and then you want 2, or maybe you want to stack 2 on the same side. Or you're using them maybe in a bun or something like that, and you just want a little decoration. Circles are easy as far as which direction, doesn't really matter, except for I kind of pay attention if I do have something that creates a line, whether I want it to go vertical or horizontal. And so that you need to kind of be aware of if you don't want it to look kind of cockeyed. So I did a couple of sets of 2 where I could find maybe a pair. Again, I was punching these out at random. And so if I ended up, I think maybe if I make more, I will try to be more conscious of having them be pairs, that kind of thing, so that, you might want one on each side of your hair, So I tried to put them in pairs, or if I could put 4 together, because then you can double them up or just have a variety. So these are just kind of random ones, but just cute little round bobby pins for your hair. And again, those are with no kind of mold or form. They were all done freehand, just with a smaller circle. So done exactly the same as we did the buttons. And then I did some heart-shaped ones. And for the hearts, depending on what side of your hair you want them to go a different direction, you need to be aware of that, because a circle can go upside down either way. It doesn't matter. But a heart, you don't want to put it upside down. So you just have to be aware of what direction. If you wanted to put it in a bun at the top just as a decoration, then you can have them go straight up and down. So the trickiest part about these, and then I also did some paper clips, same thing. I didn't use a mold. I just used a single layer of substrate and then the artwork, and did them the same exact way of the buttons. So the trickiest part about the paper clips and the hairpins was to be able to get that metal piece glued down onto my little button and not have it slide around and move, and to be able to pick it up and look and make sure I was going the right direction, because you're putting it onto the back. So the trick that I found for that is to hold your piece with the resin on the back. You've worked on the front and have that ready to go and perfect, and you're just ready to add your final metal piece, kind of like when we added the shank to the button, is I put a little bit of resin on the back, and then I held it under the light for just maybe 5-10 seconds so that it would just start to get stickier, but not completely set up. And then I could put this on, push it in, but it was sticky enough that I could pick it up and look at it and make sure if I needed to adjust it at all. And then I put it back under the light and let it cure the rest of the way. Now, the only thing about that is you're using the resin as your glue. And if it's already started to cure and then you've added your metal piece to it, sometimes that's not, if you test it afterwards, it might pop off. So I do a second add a little bit more resin to the back, especially on the paper clips. And let's see if I can pull this one off out, or actually I have one here, is I go back and I add a little bit more resin to it and do a second little cure, so that way it won't pop off, because you're using your resin as a glue. And then you could, you know, for journals, I thought those were cute. You could make little curly cues, you know, decorative on your paper clip, and then just, you know, add them to your page. So that was hairpins and paper clips were another kind of obvious to the button idea. And then the other thing that I found there were these ponytail holders. I wear my hair in a braid every day, and so I thought a ponytail holder would be fun. And these come already together with the little bezel that you just fill it. And I have a larger one here I can show you that's empty. So I made the small ones, and I just thought those were super cute. And again, you just kind of want to pay attention to the direction that if you have stripes and you want it to go a certain way. So I did these 5 small ones. I did 6. I think they came in a package of 6, but I've already been wearing one of them. So just cute little ponytail holders. And then those were only with the black elastic. And my husband saw them and he thought those were cute, but he thought they should be bigger. And so I went on to Amazon to see if I could find one with a bigger circle. And so this is what they look like. They're just empty bezels on the elastic already. So this one fit a 1-inch circle. This was a 5/8 inch, and I just happened to have a punch that size. And so that fit perfectly. And then the 1 inch fits in this one, which is the same size as the buttons. So it's not like you can go and take one of your buttons that you already made and it won't fit. You can't put it in there and glue that in there, because you've already put resin on this, and so you've actually made it bigger by putting resin on the edge. So you have to do the paper, put it in here first, and then this one I made yesterday. So what you need to do is, the tip about making these hair ties is, it's different when you're working with a bezel that has a back on it and you're putting some paper in there. Most bezels and in jewelry and anything that you see where they're making things with resin, they're pouring the resin. They maybe have colorized the resin. They're adding inclusions like, you know, glitter, mica flakes, little gems, whatever. They're putting things in that, or, you know, dried flowers, you've seen all kinds of stuff, and they're letting it cure. When you're using paper in that, it's a little bit different. You want to put the paper in and you want to glue it in first, and you want to try not to have any little air pockets underneath that. And that's the trickiest part, I think. So what I do is use like something like your art glitter glue, any kind of PVA glue, put it on the back of your paper disc. So let's imagine this is my artwork. I'm going to put the glue here. If you put it here, you might get too much glue in, and it might not, because it's metal, be on every little surface. It's easier to do that on this. So put it on your paper, plop your artwork in, and then go around the edge and make sure you have it all pressed down really well. You might need to use a little tool, you know, just to get the edge, get any excess glue out so that you don't have any of that on there, and then let that dry. And then what I like to do is, even though you might be tempted, this is not very deep, you might be tempted to just pour the resin in one shot and let it cure. I'm not saying that never works, but to me, if you have any little issues and you needed to fix them, maybe you get a big pocket in there that and I've had this happen, where you get a little, it's not even just a little air bubble, you'll get a big air pocket in there. You want to then pull the whole layer off, and you'll ruin your artwork if you do that. So I like to do what I call, you know, doing a protective layer. And so what that means is I would put a small layer of, very thin layer of resin, just brush it on there, and especially pay attention to the edge. That way, if there is any little air bubble, it's probably going to come up around that edge. The reason I get these big, like maybe a big air pocket ender, and I don't really have one to show you. I think I kind of have a little bit of one on this button. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Let me see if I can get this in there. If you look, I'm going to try to point to it right here in between these two dots. there is an air bubble, but it's kind of elongated. And the reason that is there, and sometimes you'll get them and it'll even be a lot larger than that. And it'll come late in the cure. So it's not like you can just, sometimes you can pop it and open it up and refill it. But sometimes when you start doing that, that whole layer will want to come up. And that's when you mess up your artwork because it's all paint and pen, you know. So what I like to do, and part of the reason that happens is on our papers, those are glued so many layers that gluing those strips created kind of a trough in between here. So all these papers, all these little pieces are maybe even different kinds of paper. And so if you feel this, there's a texture to it. So it's creating these little channels. So sometimes if the resin isn't filled in there and it's at a higher point, you'll get this little air pocket where the papers are lower. So you kind of have to do these in thinner layers. So I do what I call my protective layer first. So a single layer, and that just kind of lets me see if I'm going to have any air bubble issues around the edge. And sometimes I will, and sometimes that'll happen for multiple layers until you can get that sealed. So what I'll do is maybe the second layer, if I still get a little bubble off the side, I hold it under my resin for maybe 10 seconds, and you can kind of see it start to gas off and make a bubble. Sometimes it'll pop on its own, and if it doesn't, you need to pop it. So you're going to pop it while it's still soft and try to get that to turn into maybe a divot, and just keep kind of working it as it's curing. And so instead of having a bubble, you just kind of have this little divot that you can fill in the next time. So I kind of work with it in that way. The other thing is, because this is on an elastic already, it doesn't lay perfectly flat. You know, you can kind of get them to after you've been working with them. This one's pretty flat now, but when you're first starting and you can't really touch it, you know, you don't want to touch the resin. So I usually take it, just hold this level under my light for 10, 20 seconds. And that usually sets it enough that it's not going to, you know, be lopsided. And then I can just set it under my light and let it cure the rest of the way. So I just kind of hold these by hand for 10 or 20 seconds. And then I might put it under the light with something, you know, underneath the low end to kind of level it out. So that way when it's curing, it's level. So when you're working with the hair bands, that's just kind of 2 little tips, is don't try to pour it all at once. And I did this probably in 2, 3, maybe 4 pours, because I like it to be a little bit domed. I don't know if you can see that. This one could probably even, for me, go 1 more layer. If I look at these, they're probably domed a little bit more, where you see the resin come above. I just think that looks a little bit more professional to have that be domed. So you do it gradually. You know, you do your first couple layers till you're kind of level, and you get to a point when you're able to get past the worried about bubbles part, you can kind of just do it like this, and you'll get the resin to flow to the edge without flowing over. And once I know I'm level, then I add a few more drops in the middle, and then that gets your doming done. The other thing that I should mention, I didn't mention this in the previous button video for a couple of reasons, but I've had people comment in that video as if I didn't know something already. When I did the jewelry with the epoxy, 2-part epoxy, there's a way to get the bubbles out before you put it in to start curing. Those bubbles are, to me, there's 2 kind of bubbles. There's the ones that come up around the edge when you're working with a bezel, and then there's ones that maybe come out of the bottle or are created as you're doing your pour. So 2 things. One is, before you start curing it, you can let it sit for a little bit, and it'll kind of start off gassing, and the bubbles, if there are, will start getting larger or come to the surface, and you can pop them. The ones that come around the edge, sometimes those don't really occur until it's in the UV light, because it's getting a little heat, and so then it's coming up around the side. So heat actually will dissipate your bubbles. And so one of the things that I used was I did soldering. So I would have like a little butane torch. That is a much stronger, hotter flame than just a lighter. So this actually works better for this. But the reason that I didn't mention doing that is when you're heating up a chemical, you're creating a toxic fume, and that's unhealthy. So I didn't want to recommend anything on YouTube that was going to be dangerous or unhealthy. But I have used that and it does work. So my recommendation is to use, and I have to say that the UV resin to me was not as toxic as the epoxy 2-part resin as far as the fumes that it creates. So you want to always, no matter what you're doing, you want to read the manufacturer's instructions, and they're not going to tell you to use flame on resin. Most of them, if you go to their website, will have a safety data sheet, and so you can look at more information there. You always want to have a window open, work in a large space, have a fan going, all that kind of thing. Wear a mask so that you're protecting yourself. But the other thing that I use is an extractor. So this is not a fan. If you just have a fan going while you're doing this, you're just moving the fumes or any kind of chemical that you're breathing in, any of that stuff. You're just moving it around your room. This will actually extract it away from you. So you're wearing a mask or anything anyway, but this is just like an extra precaution. It has a filter, this blue filter, and then there's actually another thicker filter inside. And instead of blowing the chemical away from you, it's actually sucking it into this machine. So if you put it in front of you, this is what I use for soldering. So if you put it in front of you and you're doing your work here, instead of me inhaling it this way, it's going to extract it away from me. So this is a handy thing to have if you're going to be doing anything like this. But like I said, I didn't find this UV resin. It doesn't have an odor or anything. So I wasn't too concerned. And then you use this flame is just, I mean, this is hardly hot. It's not bad at all. So what you would do is you pour your thing and then just wave this over it, back and forth. And it will dissipate any bubbles also. So yes, I knew about this. I did use it. I was hesitant about even bringing it up on YouTube. So my channel's not for children. I'm assuming people have common sense. So you want to protect yourself, and I'm not recommending you do anything that's toxic. Okay. So that's for the ones with the bezels, the hair thingies, paper clips. I'm going to get all these out of my way. Oh, I guess I should show you these. These turned out super cute. Just, little ponytail holders. And then I had the idea, and I will show you this one, what I came up with. I had a sleepless night because I love these. And I always use a little bit of black pen. So the black hairband, coordinates nicely with that. But I tend to wear a hairband that matches more my hair color. So for me, I use the blonde, the light tan, or a darker tan color. Let me get these. So I thought, how can I use the color that I want to wear? This is a brown one. And put my button on this and have my own hairband without having to buy these. I mean, these weren't expensive, but, I wanted to use a different color of a hairband. The other thing is, to me, this hairband... Actually, this one's pretty stiff. The one I got at Michael's, the smaller ones, they were pretty loose. And I like this one's also pretty stiff. So, I guess every brand is different. But I haven't tried one of these in my hair, but I did do a smaller one. And it was a little bit loose. So that was the other thing. I mean, it works. You just have to wrap it around one more time. But I thought, I wanted to do one with a brown band. So I actually am going to do this here. And where's my button that I was going to use this button? So I came up with this idea because I remembered that a few years ago I did a journal that was my bohemian colorful hand-painted paper one. And these weren't gel prints, but I used hand-painted papers. And I made beads. And so these I turned into a bracelet. But I remembered I did some just right onto a pencil. And I have this skewer here that I keep on my desk so that whenever I have any little scrap of painted paper, I just wrap it on here. These have not been resined yet, but I just keep this going. And then when I have a bunch, I'll resin, or when I'm working with resin, I will resin these up. So to do these beads, you use a strip of paper. The width of your bead is going to be the width of the widest end of your paper. And then for this type of bead, the paper tapers to a point. And that way you get this shape. And you see, like in most most cases, these weren't very busy papers. But if your paper is one color at one end and kind of changes color, when you wrap that, it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you would see the different variations in color and pattern that get layered on top of each other. So it creates that kind of shape of bead. But I thought what I could do is, instead of creating a bead that had that kind of cone shape, that I just do a flat one. And that way I'm kind of creating a bail to put my button on. So this I put the paper on and I started to resin, but I have not finished it. But you can see it slides along like the bail does. And then all I need to do now, I need to finish resining this, but all I'll need to do now is I want to kind of maybe make it, squish it, make it flat. And then I can just resin that onto my button. Now I do need to be careful when I do this that I don't get the elastic in the resin. So maybe I do this and kind of hold it up while it's starting to cure, and then I can let it go. And I think I would do the same thing where once it's on, I would add a little bit more around, on the sides, just so it's attached really well. So I'll take this one out of my hair. I actually made one and I've been wearing it the last couple of days. So you can see I've kind of, on these two sides, I kind of built up a little bit more resin. And I think that, if this ever got like totally worn out, that I could probably cut this off and redo that part again with a new elastic and still be using the same button. But I like that. I mean, that was a way that I could do what color I wanted for my elastic. So that's what I have in my hair right now. Okay, so the other thing that I made, two other things that I'll show you real quick here, is another obvious one was to make necklaces. And so I found, again, I picked these up at Michael's, and they're open bezels. So if you found a closed bezel that had metal on the back, you would do it just the same as the buttons, where you do that protective layer and then, slowly build them up to avoid the bubbles. And then, but this one is an open bezel. So I'm going to show you how I did these. And it came in a package of different shapes. So here is an oval one. And I like that because, usually when you're wearing a necklace, it might get flipped around, and that way it's interesting on both sides. So here's another one. And I just thought those were, a lot of fun, colorful, artsy necklace. And I also picked up these chains. So these were not, expensive. They're just base metal, plated. So the one tricky part about this, and I don't have my necklace here, I'm not wearing it to show you. I make my own bezels that are solid metal. So if you get resin on them, you can sand them and buff them and all of that and clean any of that off. You cannot do that on this. In fact, I think I tried to on this one, and it started, I don't know if you can see any coloration difference. It's really subtle. I'm not even sure. I think it takes the plating off. It's probably copper or some base metal underneath. So it's not very forgiving if you get any resin where you don't want it. So that is kind of the only thing you have to be super careful when you're using these. But they're still cute, and then just a little chain. So I'm thinking when I get back to my jewelry things, I can make, if you've seen my jewelry, I do beaded chains on links and that kind of thing, that it would be fun to have a nice original piece of artwork pendant and then, do the chain. And I can do the bezels myself again so that I can sand them. They'll be solid metal and not a plated base metal. So to do that, I bought these, and these you can just get at Michael's. And this had 20 different pieces, different shapes. So there's rectangle, there's teardrop shape. I haven't tried some triangles, some hexagon, and then the oval one. And so to do this, and you can even actually use this packaging if you want. This plastic will work great. But I have some craft plastic that I make my stencils out of, and I have lots of scrap of that. So this is what I've been using to kind of put things in and out of the UV light. So you want to just take your shape, and I have made an oval and I've made the rectangle, and you're going to just lay it on your craft plastic. And I used a Sharpie, this the fine point Sharpie marker and just draw your pattern from the inside. And then when you cut that, for the oval one, I like to use cuticle scissors because they're curved and you can get around a nice curve. Just take your time, and I would start cutting outside of the pen mark and then kind of try to dry fit it, and you'll probably have to take off a little more. You want to try to get as close to an exact fit as you can so that you don't have any gap around. So I ended up where I probably trimmed about halfway through my pen mark, and that was a good snug fit for both of these. So once you have the pattern, and I've tested them on from one piece to another piece, and they're pretty close. This one I can actually see a little bit of daylight there on this one. So you might want to, instead of reusing the pattern for the different ones in the package, you might want to make one for each piece that you do, and that's going to be your pattern. Okay, so once you have your pattern, then you're going to go to your art piece and you'll lay it down and just find your composition that you want, wherever that is, and then take your pattern. And I kind of like to visually, like, say that's where I'm going to choose. If I'm visually choosing this, maybe it's because I'm wanting to kind of center these three pieces, these three designs. And, you know, because this is all kind of wonky, you're not going to get, you know, every line to be horizontal. So, but you might look at one and say, if I have one horizontal and those look like they're this direction, then that's going to help your composition. Even though things are kind of wonky, it's still going to look like it's straight in your frame. So once you kind of have a guide, maybe I'm looking at these two dots and I see where I'm hitting here at the top. Get a visual, and then plop your pattern in there, which is going to kind of fall through. Kind of get it where it's going to be. And then I can take this away. And then I have my little guide. I was paying attention to the fact I could see a little bit of this gold. I had these two dots here. I was kind of to the bottom here. You know, make sure you have what looks like a horizontal line somewhere, so it doesn't end up looking crooked. And then you're going to take a pencil, and I use a pencil instead of a pen because I might want to erase something. And this is just a little mechanical pencil that I really like. It's from Pentel. It just has a nice sharp tip. And I'm just going to go around that a couple times, and then I can remove that and I'll have my pattern drawn on there. And then once I have the pattern, again, I want to cut outside the line. It's easier to take away, but you can't bring back, right? So cut outside the line and then start dry fitting it and fine tune it. And you can actually get to even fine tuning using an emery board as like a sandpaper and sanding a little high spot or something off. So once you have an exact one that you know is the right size, you're going to find your other pattern for the reverse and do the same thing. But on that one, when I go to do my finish cutting, if I have any little wonkiness about it, I'll go ahead and glue those two pieces together back to back and then fine tune to the one that I had already cut. That way they're going to match exactly. And so you get those all fine tuned and dry fit to where you're able to put that into this bezel and it's not going anywhere. It's just it's happy where it is. And you can kind of get it centered because you only have so much room here. And as thick as these two, this paper is, by the time I have it on a substrate, it's pretty thick. So 2 layers of this pretty much fills that bezel flush. So you might have just a small amount that isn't. And you need that to be able to you're gluing this to the paper that you've created. So hopefully yours ends up being a little bit narrower when they're both are glued together, a little bit narrower than the width of your bezel, just so you have a nice adhesion. I think when I did the first one, I may have actually even painted a little resin either on the edge of my 2 papers glued together or on the inside of this, and then popped it in there and let that cure. I do know that when I first did these, I would just use my little paintbrush or just this pokey end that you get. This is a tool that comes with the resin. I went over all this in the last video, but you get 2 bottles of this and 2 pouring cups that I really kind of just use as a, you know, if I want just a little resin that I'm going to, you know, paint onto something, I'll dip from there. But I've been pouring really just from the bottle directly onto my piece because it pours really just 1 drop at a time. And usually when you're pouring, you don't really want to squeeze the bottle. You don't want to shake the bottle because you don't want to create any bubbles. But if you're pouring, you know, slowly and you're just letting it kind of fall out of the bottle, if a bubble comes out with it, you'll see that. And then you'll know you have one you need to get rid of. And a lot of times you'll be able to find that one right away and just, you know, pop it with something. So you want to pour very slowly. And again, just start with your kind of what I call that protective layer where you do the thinnest layer. It's just really going to get your piece of paper glued into your bezel. And then from there you can build up to get your doming or however thick you want that. And because the paper really almost goes to the edge of these, you don't really have to put too many layers. So I think I ended up with maybe 2 or 3 layers on these. And again, just using your flame, you know, back and forth, it will get rid of any of those bubbles that caused that pitting that I had happening in the buttons because I didn't want to use the flame in my video. So anyway, that's what you'll do for those. And then the only other thing that I did try, and I don't know how wild I am about them, is I did go ahead and try to use these little forms. This came with the UV light I ordered. And it has, I mean, they're nice shapes. And there's a circle, 2 hearts, an oval, star, little 4-leaf clover thing, little rectangular, some triangles, and a diamond shape. So, I mean, there are all useful sizes for different charms and things. And so I tried doing one with the paper, and I glued my, you know, I needed a pattern for this. Like I said, when you buy these forms for jewelry, mostly people are filling them with resin and adding inclusions to them, where I wanted to have that piece be my whole piece of paper, my art piece. So you end up again with the potential of having bubbles underneath and all of that. So what I did was I just used this kind of to make a pattern so that I would already have the hole in it. So to do that, I just poured a little bit of resin just to make a pattern for myself. And I actually made these thicker than I needed to be. But my whole thing about using a form that already has this little nib on it for the hole is I can't just make a pattern, cut it, and put it in there because that little nib, I need to punch a hole in my paper that lines up perfectly with that. So by creating this pattern out of the actual mold, I could lay this onto my paper, see exactly where I wanted, go around my, you know, trace around it. And then in this case, I would be cutting on the inside of my line because I want it to fit into my mold. But then I have that hole where I could just use a pen or pencil. And if it's not too thick, I can actually make a mark where that hole is and then use my little tiny punch. I happen to have, I don't know the size to tell you, but I happen to have this little tiny punch that's the same size as that little nib. And so that way I'm able to punch the hole into my paper artwork and do 2 of them, glue them back to back. And then when I do my resin, I can't remember if I even used the form. I think I might have like put it in here and did one side and then take it out and then do the other side. And then I did the edges and everything because it's kind of, so now it doesn't fit in here anymore. It's larger than that thing. So that was one way to make kind of this pendant that doesn't have a bezel on it at all. And so you could make a bunch of those and then, you know, use them for charms. I think the thing to remember about this is I think I may have had to go back and re-drill my hole because if you're not careful, you'll end up getting resin in that hole. And the other thing is if you get them too thick like we do, you know, if you do too many layers, it's so thick that like this is just a standard size jump ring that came in like a whole kit, you know, similar to this kind of thing, but had a variety of, let's see, where did it go? It has a variety of findings. Again, they're just base metal with their silver color, but it would have all the some ear wires and some little lobster clasps and different things, you know, just a variety pack. So it only had one size of jump ring, and it was almost too small to fit on this because I had made it so thick. So that was the only kind of weird thing about that. But I just, you know, I like to experiment and come up with different ideas and how I can use this and my artwork. So I think that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments. Tell me what your favorite thing is, if you have a favorite, or what you might want to try, because I'm just kind of doing all these things and I don't know what anybody would want. I've made, you know, you saw that I've made a few of different things. I may put some in my Etsy shop. I'm kind of trying to collect enough variety of items that have this cohesive look. So if I wanted to do a little show, art show, or art and craft fair or something like that. But I do have some other things. This was a thing that I made with the gel print that I have not done on a video yet. So I do have some more things in the works. I may do another video before I leave. I'm going to be taking a week off, and I may be able to squeeze another one in here or not before I go, which will kind of take us down a different path with gel prints. But I want to get into maybe some more things using some other products. And the other thing is I want to get into some journal things again. So if you're into journal making and art journaling and that kind of thing, I am going to be doing some gel print art project videos that have to do with journals. So those are going to be coming up soon. So I hope you enjoyed this. Again, give me a thumbs up and say hello down in the comments. So have a great rest of your day. Now go make something. Bye.